Thank you, everybody, for being here. What I would like to do today is tell you about the book, and my hope is to make you reflect and think through some of the themes that I'll be talking about from two different perspectives. One is your own perspective in terms of what you do on a daily basis, and the other one is the perspective of patients that you might have worked with or interacted with. And the idea of having both these perspectives is that the themes and what I'm going to be talking about actually apply to both. And in fact, I can tell you that I grew up in a family where my dad was a doctor, and he often came home with great stories about his own behavior, as well as his struggles in trying to understand his patient's behavior. And so my hope is that using both those lenses, you're going to walk away with at least some provoking thoughts or a different way of looking at things that happened in the past or that happen to you on a daily basis. Now, let me tell you a little bit about the main theme of the book. A lot of what I do in my research is actually looking at my own behavior and sort of trying to understand why is it so puzzling, and then looking around and seeing that other people are affected by the same patterns of behavior, and entering in organizations, you tend to see, again, some behaviors that might be puzzling and that is worth exploring. And in particular, the theme that inspired this book, and there are lots of examples actually in the book that come from things that I heard my dad say that I thought was worth studying. The theme is the idea that things often do not go according to plan. So often we start out with a goal, something that we want to do or reach, and then we sit down and write the different steps that it takes to reach that goal. But then something happens as we implement our plans, and when we look at the outcome, it's completely different from what we wanted to accomplish. And again, might be true for you in your personal and professional life, as well as in the life of others. And what I was interested in is exactly what happened at the phase of implementing our plans. And over the last 12 years, I would say, I've done quite a bit of research across a variety of contexts, and healthcare is one of them, looking at the forces that intervene as we implement our plans and that derail us. And as it turns out, there are a few of those forces that come in the way of good decision making. And at the time when these forces derail us, we don't realize that they're happening, but they tend to be very systematic. So what I'm trying to say is that by knowing what they are, in the future we're going to be able to recognize that they're influencing us at the time of decision making and potentially and hopefully stay on track going forward. Now, my hope is that you're now thinking about all situations where you started off wanting to do X and ending up doing Y, or that you saw people that you work with doing the exact same thing, reaching outcomes that were actually worse than the plan or the goals they had for themselves. Now, oftentimes you might get derailed and actually end up with a better outcome. If I think about the research that I conducted over the last decade, I'm interested in situations where the outcome is actually worse than the goal that you had in mind. I'm going to give you an example of an organization that I had the chance to study. And I'm going to take you far away from healthcare. Well, some of these people actually end up in the hospital. So this is a company that I got to study partly because I love to ride motorcycles. But there was even a better reason for that, is that they were making a decision in early 2000 about entering a new type of competition. And what I liked about them is that it seemed to be a case of a potentially effective decision making. So they were entering a new competition, having a lot of experience racing and competing in a different type of competitions where they were very, very good at. This is Ducati Corse, is an Italian organization. You can probably tell from my using my hands that I'm Italian as well. And what is interesting about them is that how they do on the track is actually important to them because it drives sales of commercial bikes. This is not why I was interested in them. I was interested in them because they were making the decision of entering this new competition, and they told themselves, they have new rules, we need a new motorcycle, a new engine. This is going to be a learning season. So we're going to set it up that way. We're going to have a very well-thought-out processes where after each race, we're going to debrief in a structured way our riders, and everybody in the team is going to bring data to suggest what it is that needs to be different for the next race. And they also had all sorts of technology to capture as much data as possible to use to run analysis and figure out what it is that they could improve on. Now, what is interesting is that, surprisingly, beyond everybody's expectations, they did incredibly well as they started off the season. This is good news, so they were happy about that. But what happened as a result of that is that learning was kind of forgotten. And they started racing, winning, and going off and celebrate. And it was impressive, actually, in a negative way, to look at the ways in which they completely disregarded the data. And the most surprising part of this is that when it came to the end of the season and they had to make decisions about the next year motorcycle and prototype, they decided to change over 60% of the components of the bike, most of which was untested. So all the fantastic data and information that I collected, because they were winning, because they were very, very confident in their skills, they left it on the side and they just made decisions disregarding that information. Now, the results is maybe not so surprising to you. They didn't do very well the year later, and they had a lot of setbacks because of that, especially early on in the season when they were using a bike that was designed basically based on no data from the previous season. So this is just an example of how easy it is to have very clear plans and goals. In this case, it's going to be a learning season. Everything is set up beautifully for that to happen. And then something happens as you're implementing your plans, and you end up with an outcome that is not so good. I'm going to tell you what kind of factors I think intervened here, but I'm going to try to be a little bit broader in providing you with a framework that I think can help in thinking about the forces that intervene and derail us as we implement our plans. Now, I used to be an economist many, many years ago, and then I started to pay more attention to my own behavior, as well as to the puzzling behaviors of colleagues and friends. And then I started walking into organizations, and I realized that if we really want to make headways in understanding people's behavior, we should look at their psychology. How is it that they make decisions? So the first set of factors that tends to derail us are factors that are related to our own thinking and emotions. There are also factors that are related to our relationships. And I think this is a particularly interesting set of forces in the context of healthcare, where often what people do is influenced by what their peers are actually doing. And the bad behavior of others can actually influence our own behavior. So I'm going to give you some example on that. And finally, we make a decision in a context. So the context in which we operate in often provides the lenses that we use to look at problems. And that can also derail us. Now, I don't have the chance to go through all the research and the different contexts that I examined, so I'm going to give you a few stories to give you a sense of some of the research behind the scenes that supports this framework. And I'm going to ask for your help so that you can help me make the points that I want to make. I know that it's a big audience, but if you don't mind, stick with me. I also know that you don't know me very well. But what I'm asking you to do is to think about the people sitting in this room. And using percentiles, I would like you to compare yourself compared to the other people in this room. I'm going to show you 6 dimensions. And if you will, just keep in mind your answer in your head or write it down. What I would like you to think about is, on that particular dimension, how you rank yourself. So if you write 100, it's because you're believing that you're better on that particular dimensions than everybody else. If you write 0, it's because you believe that you're worse than anybody else in this room. And anything in between. You're with me? OK. So the first dimension is your ability to make good decisions. Just write down a number or put it in your head. The second one is your ability to get along well with other people. I picked dimensions that I think are helpful in the jobs that you'll do. The third one is your ability to listen to the perspective of other people. The fourth one is your intelligence. Why not? A couple of more, your ability to negotiate effectively. and finally, your morality or your ethicality. Now, here's what I would like you to do. So you should have 6 numbers sitting in your head or on a piece of paper. What I'd like you to do is do some math, compute a rough average across those 6. And now you should be left with just one number. You have it? OK. Again, we don't know each other very well. But if you don't mind, raise your hand if that average is a number that is above 50. 50 or above. Raise it high. OK. It's about 98% of you, which is fantastic. It's great news, but it's also mathematical impossibility. And I use this exercise a lot. I traveled with it a lot across the globe. And what I love about it is that in just a few seconds, it shows us how positively we think about ourselves and our competence and skills across a whole variety of dimensions. In fact, the best example that I have of it comes from a survey that was done in 1996 on 1,000 Americans. And they were asked a very simple question, which was, who's the most likely to get into heaven? And they had to rate a bunch of people. Bill Clinton was one of them. So he got a 52% chance of getting into heaven. Michael Jordan, who was a very successful player at the time, got a 62% chance of getting into heaven. A third person, who was Mother Teresa, got a 79% chance of getting into heaven. This is a little bit surprising. And I think what it tells us is that as human beings, we have very, very high standards. But there is an even more interesting piece of data. There was another category of people who got an even higher chance of getting into heaven, and that was the respondents themselves, with a whopping 87% chance of getting into heaven. Now, I don't want you to walk away being pessimistic or looking at others and thinking that optimistic people are walking around all the time. That is, in fact, true. We tend to look at the mirror and see the lion. And this confidence can be good. It leads to actions. But it can also be quite bad when it becomes overconfidence. So the positive views that we have of ourselves tend to be overly optimistic view or overly positive views. So there is a very simple solution to that, which is a solution that, again, we should think about both in terms of our own behavior as well as helping others be a little bit more realistic in assessing their competence and ability of getting things done. And is this idea of pausing and editing. You pause and edit just to make sure that you're actually considering how these positive self-views can come in the way of good decision-making. Said it in another way, we need to be a little bit more aware of the fact that we have this tendency of looking in the mirror and seeing the lion. And we need to be aware of the fact that this tendency can come in the way of good decision-making. For instance, it makes us very, very reluctant to listen to what others have to say. And it makes us much more confident in what we believe to be true. We believe in our perspective, knowledge, and point of view rather than listening to that of others. I want to give you another example, and I'm going to do that by showing you a video. What you're going to see in this video clip is a person preparing for negotiations. And you're going to see 2 things. He's about to enter negotiations with his boss for salary. And his goal is not to accept a level of salary that is below a certain amount. And so since he wants to be very, very assertive, he's going to prepare with his wife first. So you're going to see, just for a few seconds, him preparing with his wife and then turning to his boss in the real negotiations.
How much do you want?
How much are you offering me?
$55,000.
I can't work here for a penny under 65. I'm sorry.
Well, I can't pay you 65.
Then I can't work here.
58,000.
65.
59.
65.
60.
65.
61.
Let me make it plain. I cannot take the job for under 65 under no conditions.
Daniel, I'm prepared to offer you $49,000.
I'll take it.
So I love this clip. I think it does a wonderful job at showing how emotions can come in the way of us sticking to our plan. And I'm not saying that emotions are necessarily bad. Emotions often give us information about the situation, but emotions can also cloud our judgment and come in the way, again, of good decision making. In these particular situations, what Daniel failed to do is to consider how anxious he might be when negotiating with his boss. And anxiety in particular is one of those emotions that affect a lot of what we do, especially in healthcare context. So some of the research that I've done, for instance, is looking at anxiety that is created in the moment and how that, in a sense, not only paralyzes our judgment, but if we are the receiver of advice, how that makes us unable to discern whether the advice that we're receiving is good or bad. And as a result of it, it might make us more receptive to advice that actually is detrimental to us, our behavior, or to our health conditions. What I think is important when we talk about emotion is recognizing that emotions can be powerful, not only because they affect our judgment and our decision making, but also because that they trickle over to other situations that are related to that. So one of the situations in which I saw this is oftentimes I'm brought into organization to observe group decision-making processes. And for this particular organization, I was observing the group discussion that was happening for the launch of a new product. And the leader sat down with me, had a fantastic plan of wanting to hear everybody's perspective so that they could have a decision that was good for the organizations overall. And then what happened is that he picked me up. This was LA a few years back. And we got stuck in traffic. And he was really fuming with anger the more we waited in traffic. We arrived late for the meeting, so he didn't have time to review his notes. He didn't have time for his coffee. And what was interesting is that the team interactions were quite dysfunctional. So rather than doing what he planned to do of leaving people open so that they could provide their perspectives, he actually dominated the entire conversation. Now, this is just one case. In that particular case, they decided to launch the product where if they actually analyzed the information that everybody had to provide, they would have decided differently. But it's an important example because it tells about situations where the anger didn't come from the meeting itself. It came from something completely unrelated. And oftentimes, the emotions that are triggered by something that might seem actually ridiculous and unimportant trickle over to other situations and, again, influence our judgment and our decision making. One of the principles that can help us there is actually a very simple principle, and I call it take your emotional temperature. And it's one that works. It reminds us that we are feeling emotions or feelings that might not affect what we do, but they are. And they might allow us to realize that it's better to take a step back, maybe come to the decisions when we are a little bit more cool off in terms of our emotions. Now, unfortunately, forces from within are not the only things that affect our decision-making as we implement our plans. There are also forces from our relationships, and there are many, many different examples of that. I don't want to go through this example in particular. What I want to leave you with is the idea that oftentimes when we make decisions, we should check our reference points. And what I mean by that is that we have amazing data coming from all sorts of sources, and again, some of it from healthcare, suggesting that the decisions that we make are often influenced by what we see others do, both when it comes to good behavior, but more importantly, when it comes to bad behaviors. So seeing others not exercising, if these are people who we consider our buddies, for example, influence our decisions of whether or not to go to the gym. And there are some behaviors that are even more important to thinking about our own health or our own decision making. So if we take a step back, what is it that I'm hoping to convey with just these couple of stories? What I'm hoping to have made you think about more carefully is the very, very subtleties of being human beings. And the fact that oftentimes we look at others, we might see that their behavior is completely puzzling to us or difficult to explain. And maybe rather than calling them crazy or irrational, we might be thinking about the factors that we have created in the situations that might have derailed their decisions. And the same things should be said about our own decision-making, situations in which things did not go according to plan. Maybe you have now a few ideas in thinking about how you can stay on track going forward. As I said, I'm summarizing years of writing in just 20 minutes. So my hope with today's talk is that I opened up a conversation. As I said, I found myself in healthcare contexts quite often. So if you see strange behaviors or you want to talk a little bit more about this, just feel free to reach out to me and we can start the conversations like that. Thank you.